Accidentally taking a turn onto Fear Street will wind you up in Shadyside, with a centuries-old witch's curse, relationship drama, and nurses that illegally distribute drugs to kids. Now, how could you get yourself out of that? Our buddies Deena, Sam, Josh, Kate, and Simon face just that in Fear Street Part 1, 1994, and today we're going to look at everyone who met their demise during the duration of this film, and if they could have lived. Our first sign of the dead comes at 6 minutes 15 seconds in, with a random mall employee who is shown dead in the food court. Since we have no knowledge of the events leading up to their death, we cannot say that they could have lived, or that their death was slated. Our next death occurs at 7 minutes 7 seconds in with Ryan. While Heather, the mall employee who has been chased by a masked killer for the last 5 minutes, is being fatally stabbed, she removes the mask of her attacker only to reveal the face of her friend Ryan. It's actually a really sad moment as she is filled with confusion, fear, and sadness. Just as she pleads with him to stop because they are friends, he is shot in the head by a cop named Nick Good. Now, because we learn of a witch's curse later in this movie, and learn that it is the reason Ryan and others have randomly turned into psychotic killers, and also because we learn just how these killers are selected in the following films, I'm rather confident in saying that there is only one person who could have prevented Ryan's death. And it just so happens that they could have prevented it in more than one way. However, since Ryan himself and his friends had no chance of saving him, I'm going to say his death was slated. Immediately following Ryan's death, Heather succumbs to her wounds. Moments away from help and in extreme confusion, her death is pretty sad. She is painfully slashed and stabbed by her best friend and suffers a drawn-out chase and death. However, even with that nasty wound across her stomach, I have optimism for Heather. She is not an idiot. And at one point in her chase, she even gets the upper hand on the skull-masked killer by planting a bloody handprint and making him believe she had hidden behind a curtain. When the killer moves the curtain to the side, she hits him over the head with a heavy object, and then she makes her fatal mistake. She runs. If she had taken the extra second to grab the killer's knife, he couldn't have stabbed her in the back with it and delivered those fatal blows before he was shot. I also have the impression that Heather could have been in the mind space to grab the knife because she was able to think quickly enough to trick the killer in the first place. Because of this, I'm going to say Heather could have lived. At 7 minutes 33 seconds in, the opening credits roll and reveal a newspaper article that tells us a total of 8 people died in the mall, which must include Heather, Ryan, and the random guy in the food court. Since we do not even know where the other 5 were killed, and we are certainly unaware of the events leading up to their deaths, we can't say if any of those 5 could have lived or not. Now, the opening credits for Fear Street introduces us to many of the previous Shadyside killers, including some from the following movies. These killers are talked about further on in the movie and even make a comeback and score some extra post-mortem kills. Since we are given counts of the number of people each of them killed, I'm going to take a look at each of these killers for a moment. I am not, however, going to look at the Camp Nightwing Killer or Cyrus Miller, because their actions are featured in the later films and we can determine if their victims could have lived or not. Starting with Ruby Lane, we are shown a newspaper clip dated February 11, 1965, highlighting her as a high-achieving girl with the murders of her friends seemingly coming out of nowhere. In the second film, Ruby's story is expanded on as her mother, Nurse Lane, works at Camp Nightwing. It is told that after killing her boyfriend and 6 friends, she killed herself before help arrived, leaving us with Ruby's death being the only one that is slated, and 7 that we cannot tell. Next, we are taken to a newspaper article from May 14, 1950, that talks about Milkman Harry Rooker, who took a switchblade and killed 7 women as they opened their door to greet him. Now, as far as I can tell, the death of the Milkman is not mentioned, though because all of the other killers die, it is reasonable to assume that he dies as well. Though, because it's not mentioned, I'm not going to include it, and I'm just going to say we have 7 unclear deaths. We are also introduced to the child killer Billy Barker, the Humpty Dumpty killer, the grifter, and a few others, but it is unclear how many people they killed. Moving on, after Sam has bled on the bones of Sarah Fear, the Shadyside killers are reanimated with the sole purpose of killing Sam. While she and Deena argue in the hospital, her boyfriend Peter is suddenly stabbed from behind and succumbs to his injuries at 39 minutes 50 seconds in. There wasn't really any reason for Peter to be weary in this situation, aside from the escalation between Deena and Sam. If anything though, that would prompt him to turn his attention fully to the two of them in case any fighting broke out. Because of this, and because of how silent the skull-masked killer was, I do not believe Peter could have reacted before being stabbed. And considering that the one stab was fatal, I'm going to say Peter's death was slated. At 41 minutes 23 seconds in, as Deena and Sam run from the killer, they stumble across the body of Stephanie, the woman who had been working at the hospital's front desk. Because she was killed off-screen, we can't determine if she could have lived or not. Right after Stephanie's body is discovered, Nurse Beddy walks into the room. He notices Sam and Deena hiding, but then turns his attention to the killer and tells him that he cannot be wearing a mask in the hospital. Subsequently, at 41 minutes 30 seconds in, he is fatally stabbed in the neck. There was not much time between when Beddy entered the room and when he died, so I can imagine that he didn't have much of a chance. However, he certainly noticed Deena and Sam, so I do not believe it would have been too far-fetched for him to have noticed Stephanie's body as well. Deena also tries to warn him, and in my opinion, all of that would have been enough to send me running. Since we learned later on that the killer is only after Sam's blood, I do not believe it would have chased Beddy had he run away. And because of this, I'm going to say Nurse Beddy could have lived. Coming in at 1 hour 25 minutes in, both Kate and Simon meet their demises within moments of each other. After a drawn-out fight in which Kate gets the upper hand on the skull-masked killer numerous times, she's eventually overtaken, and despite her strength, she cannot get herself off of a bread-cutting machine, and her head is eventually pushed through and sliced into pieces like bread. Shocked by Kate's dead body, Simon stops running from the killers and takes a moment to look at Josh. This hesitation allows the Camp Nightwing killer to catch up to him, and Simon is killed by an axe to the head. Now, in terms of Kate, she fought with all of her ferocity and made incredibly smart moves. It wasn't that she really missed something that could have saved her, it was just that she didn't have the strength to get the killer off of her. She did, however, have one free hand, which she occasionally used to try and get the killer off. The only possibility that I can see Kate as having to live would be if she had used that free hand to turn the machine off. Earlier, the machine turns on as Kate runs by it and brushes into it, so I'm assuming there's a button on the side that she could have reached for. But even then, it's a questionable situation. Because of how hard she tried, I'm going to say that the situation was too frantic for her to have successfully reached the off button, and therefore her death was slated. In terms of Simon, he dies because Kate died. And following my guidelines for the series, I'm going to be looking at each death with the assumption that all of the deaths beforehand have occurred. Simon and Kate were rather unserious through the film, and I can imagine the severity of Kate's death would hit Simon like a truck. It seems completely normal for him to have frozen up in that situation, just as it would have been normal if he had kept freaking out and running. But because Kate dies, I'm going to say Simon's death is slated. Now, just to explore Kate and Simon's deaths a little bit further, I can see a few situations in which neither of them die. At this point, we know that Sam's heart needs to stop in order to stop the killers from going after her. So the plan is to have Sam overdose in the supermarket and then to revive her. First, considering only the few minutes before their deaths, it is clear that the overdosing plan is not working. If Deena and Sam had only been faster in deciding on and actually implementing their Plan B drowning idea, Sam's heart would have stopped a lot faster and potentially caused the killers to dissipate long before Kate or Simon were killed. I understand their hesitancy, but I feel like they also should have had more of a sense of urgency considering that Deena's best friends and brother were marked with Sam's blood and being chased by killers. And finally, looking a little beyond the few minutes before their deaths, I think that their whole plan in the supermarket was a move that could have been done differently and resulted in both Kate and Simon's survival. While watching this film, I always felt like the characters were safest while they were on the move. The reanimated killers are supernatural in the sense that they cannot be killed by mortal weapons, but they don't teleport. I think it would have been leagues smarter if the team had gathered the necessary drugs for the overdose and then drove around while Sam took the drugs. They would have had proper time to implement the plan, and the situation wouldn't have been as chaotic. Our final death of this film comes in at 1 hour 27 minutes in with Sam herself as she is drowned by Deena. Though she is revived shortly after, so it is confirmed that she could have and did live in light of this situation. All in all, Fear Street Part 1 leaves us with a total of 29 kills, with 9 on-screen dead bodies and 20 mentioned deaths. Of the dead, 5 deaths were slated, 2 could have lived, 1 actually did live, and a whopping 21 were unclear. Thank you all for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you have anything you'd like to add or think anyone could or couldn't have lived, leave a comment below. Also, please consider leaving a like and subscribe to support me. As always, remember to be good people, love others, and love yourselves. Peace.